A touch, a heartbeat, a love strong enough to break the impossible in this timeline. Bella becomes the reason Edward feels human again, literally. Welcome to What If Bella Made Edward Human. Edward pulled up the long drive, more slowly than he usually would have done. That alone alerted me that something was awaiting us at the house, but even if he'd sped through the trees as normal, I don't think the large banner across the house would have surprised me. Happy birthday, Bella. Edward and I had been married exactly a month ago, in the Cullens' massive yard. Since, he'd taken me on the most ridiculously extravagant honeymoon possible, traveling from London to Istanbul and everywhere in between. He wanted me to see the world. I was happy to be with him. Truly, it had been bliss. Edward had given me the one human experience I'd wanted more than anything, and he'd given it to me every day since, sometimes several times a day. A flood of heat spread through me at the memory of what we'd done just before we left from Paris. I can't believe it's been a month already, I sighed, trying to force a suitcase closed. Edward tugged my hand away and zipped it with ease. We can come back as many times as you like, he promised, pulling me into the circle of his arms. Europe isn't going anywhere. It's not exactly Europe I'll miss, I said, burrowing closer. But I'll miss us. Like this, the way we are now. I don't want that to change. It won't change, he said. If you think I'll ever be able to keep my hands off you, you're mad. As if to emphasize his point, his hands slid lower, cupping my bottom. His hardened length pressed into my hips and I groaned his name. Even when I'm not human, I questioned breathlessly as he guided me back to the bed. He pushed the suitcase aside and I was suddenly in its place. Even then, his lips brushed my collarbone, exposed in the tank top I wore. Especially then, his hands caressed my skin. Why, oh, you can't imagine the things I want to do to you. I laughed shakily while I fumbled at the hem of his polo. I'm not that innocent. I think I can imagine a few. The shirt landed audibly on the floor. His strong fingers easily rent my top in two. Must you keep doing that? I asked, my voice comically weak as his lips closed around my nipple. You don't really mind, he murmured, and I was too busy touching him to argue. The ripples of muscle under his skin distracted me completely, and he took advantage of it, deftly undoing my jeans and tugging them off, my underwear going with them. Just 3 weeks ago I was still embarrassed to be this exposed in this face of all his perfection. Now I was finally getting used to it being exposed, that is. I would never be immune to his beauty. His hands were everywhere at once, my breasts, my hips, my thighs. I struggled to breathe with each slow, cool caress. He made my skin tingle. I fought to find enough presence of mind to move my hands to his waist where his jeans rode low on his hips. I traced the smooth lines of his exposed pelvic bone, excited at the prospect of where that line led. His response was a low purr in my ear that only served to make me want him more. His lips grazed my neck and then reached my mouth. The taste of him under my tongue was enough to keep me from noticing when he shed his pants. I only noticed when I fell. His naked hardness pressing against me. I gasped at the shock. Sorry, he murmured, backing away a fraction of an inch. Don't be, was my reply as I pressed my body into his once more. I liked it, he moaned quietly, holding me to him, allowing the head of his erection to brush tantalizingly against my center. Edward, I sighed, wrapping my legs around his waist, please. Usually, at this point, he would tease me for my impatience. This time for once he seemed as impatient as I was. He slid into me with one smooth stroke. This was my favorite moment when we made love, the moment of ultimate completion and that first burst of pleasure. I clung to his body, so solid and cold in such a strangely arousing way, as he stroked in and out. He moved in a maddeningly steady rhythm, perfectly controlled and perfectly calculated to drive me out of my senses. It was more than I could stand, the fire that consumed me from within as he gradually increased his tempo, until I was crying out and digging my fingers into his back. My muscles clenched forcefully around him, the better to feel every inch of him, and I was lost. His guttural groan in my ear was all I heard as I fell over the edge. "Jesus, Bella," he breathed, barely holding his weight off me. "You're too much." "So are you," I said as I struggled to catch my breath. He nuzzled my throat and his cool skin felt wonderful against mine, overheated as I was. "Damn," I muttered, remembering my torn shirt. "Now I have to unpack something." He just laughed. The more innocent parts of our honeymoon had been wonderful, too, seeing all the sights I'd only read about. With Edward by my side, explaining the history as he knew it from Carlyle's stories and his own experience. We'd held hands in Paris and cuddled in a gondola in Venice. And I'd eaten too many kinds of food to count while Edward looked on with distaste and amusement, and we'd bought too many souvenirs and more luggage to hold them all. I could admit it now. I was glad for the experiences he'd given me, glad I hadn't rushed into the change, and glad most of all that he'd been by my side. When we got out of the car, I found I didn't want to fight the party I knew I'd find inside. I didn't mind that I was 19 years old today. Somewhere along the line, the numbers had ceased to matter as much, as long as Edward was happy and I would have an eternity with him. "You don't mind," he affirmed, his hand caressing my lower back as we paused at the door. "No," I smiled. "I think it's a good time to start celebrating." He smiled back and kissed me quickly before ushering me inside. The entire family, even Rosalie, waited in the living room to greet us. I heard several exclamations of, "Welcome home," and, "Happy birthday," as Alice rushed to hug me. "How was the honeymoon?" she asked gleefully. "Did you bring me presents?" I laughed. The honeymoon was wonderful, and yes, we did bring presents, but shouldn't I be asking that question? Emmett's laugh boomed beside me. Closer than I expected. What, all that time with Edward wasn't present enough? The wiggle of Emmett's eyebrows told me exactly what he was suggesting, and I blushed. Edward growled slightly beside me. "Leave her alone, Emmett," he said, crossing his arms over his chest in a menacing stance. Emmett laughed, unfazed. "I see finally getting laid hasn't loosened you up any. You need to keep working on him, Bella." "Emmett, don't embarrass her," Esme chastised as I blushed furiously. Alice laughed and dragged me into the dining room, the others following behind us. I heard occasional thumps that suggested Emmett and Edward were still feuding behind me. The dining room was decorated with relatively non-dangerous balloons and flowers, and I felt fairly confident that there would be no repeat of my last birthday party, or the consequences that followed. Edward and I were together for good now, and if Jasper happened to take a bite out of me, well, that would only hasten the inevitable. Alice directed me into a chair at the head of the table. The others remained standing around the table, and I started to feel rather like the main course at a banquet. All that was missing was a silver platter and an apple stuffed in my mouth. Edward came up behind me, resting his hand on the back of my neck, and I relaxed instantly. "Time for presents," Alice cried gleefully, and she darted into the kitchen only to return a split second later with a pile of packages. Some of them were absurdly large. "Oh, really, now? What more could I possibly need?" I groaned in dismay as the pile landed in front of me. The wedding gifts had been bad enough. Obviously, we'd had no need for the appliances and furniture and kitchenware that generally appeared as wedding gifts, but that had stopped Alice from registering us at several stores, much to my embarrassment. "Don't be silly, Bella, it's your birthday," Alice argued. "It's not about what you need, it's about what you want." Quote, "Although some of it is actually what you'll need when we unpack all your stuff," Emmett added before I could protest. As it turned out, Emmett was right. 2 of the gifts were shelves for my endless books and a wardrobe, a very lovely antique wardrobe, to be precise, that I would need for my clothes, given that Edward's closet was nearly full already with nearly a century's worth of clothing. Vampires, as it turned out, were horrible packrats. I would have to introduce the concept of cleaning things out once in a while to this household, clearly. Carlyle and Esme gave us a simpler gift, a framed copy of our wedding photo. Looking upon it, I thought that I finally looked like I belonged by his side. That's not to say that I didn't still look ridiculously plain next to his godlike beauty. But it was as though his happiness radiated onto me. As though Edward loving me could make me beautiful. Edward's lips touched behind my ear as if he had read my thoughts. "The camera doesn't do you justice," he murmured. "Do you think so?" I said absently. "The most beautiful thing I've ever seen is you on our wedding day," he said as he turned his head to kiss my temple. I melted. He deserved so much more than I could give. And yet he had given me so much, at least I had been able to give him a wedding. I was glad now that I hadn't pressed for an elopement when I could hear the joy in his voice at the memory. "Enough of that. You too," Alice cut in. "It's time for the main event." The lights abruptly went out, and I tensed. That didn't bode well, knowing Alice. But she merely appeared through the door from the kitchen, carrying a small cake, alight with candles. 19 forever, the icing read. I had to laugh. Alice set it neatly before me, far enough away that I was unlikely to singe anything. "Make a wish," she demanded. I thought about that. I had everything I had ever wanted. If only I could make Edward so happy. I wish I could give Edward all the human experiences he's given me. I took a deep breath, blew out the candles, and then everything went black. Something was very wrong. One moment, I was blowing out my birthday candles. The next, I opened my eyes to a completely different world. I was on a busy street somewhere. I couldn't identify the place. But what were even more bizarre were the people. All the women wore long, ankle-length dresses with long sleeves, and he men all wore slacks and button-down shirts, some with jackets, some with suspenders. It looked like the early 1900s. The buildings, too, looked like relics from the past. Brick buildings, none larger than 4 stories or so down the street, were Victorian-style houses. But this couldn't be the past, could it? "Excuse me, miss," a voice said, an achingly familiar voice, but I couldn't place it. I turned to look for the face that accompanied the voice, and stopped in my tracks. I could barely stifle my gasp. It was Edward, but Edward as I had never seen him before. I looked him over from top to bottom. His hair was the same, his face was not. Flushed from the wind that swept around us, his skin was darker than I'd ever seen it, and his face was rounder, younger looking, soft, and his eyes. They danced in the light. A disconcerting green. Maybe his dazzling had nothing to do with his vampire abilities after all. And then I understood. This Edward wasn't a vampire. He was human. And this was the past. Edward's past. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice snapped me out of my daze. He looked uncomfortable, and I realized I had been staring. I thought quickly. If I had somehow gone back in time, then I would need some help taking care of myself here. I had no place to stay, no clothes, no money, no food, a very precarious situation. And if anyone were to help me, it might as well be Edward. Why would I be in this time and place if not to see him, anyway? "Actually," I said carefully, "I'm a bit lost." "Where are you going? Perhaps I can help you find your way." Maybe. Lost wasn't the right word. I don't have any place to go." I saw the traces of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "You don't live in Chicago?" "No," I replied, deciding to stay as close to the truth as possible, so I would be less likely to confuse myself. "I'm from Washington." He frowned in that disapproving way of his. "And you're here unattended? You've no one to take care of you?" I started to bristle at the assumption that I would need someone to take care of me, but it occurred to me that that was exactly what I needed at the moment. Arguing wouldn't help my case. "I didn't exactly intend to come here," I said, avoiding the details that would surely land me in an asylum. "But I have nowhere else to go, either." "Edward," a female voice called from across the street. I looked to see a beautiful woman with Edward's hair and eyes coming toward us, glancing between Edward and I in confusion, no doubt perplexed by my clothing and my loose hair. "Is there a problem?" I was just asking this young lady if she needed assistance, Edward answered. "It seems she has nowhere to go." "And have you introduced yourself?" his mother asked, wearing the same smirk that I had seen so many times on Edward's face. Edward blushed. Color actually flooded his face, as easily as it did mine. I fought to hide my surprise. How would I ever cope with seeing this human Edward? I hadn't gotten to that part yet. He muttered before he turned to me. "Forgive me. My name is Edward Masson and this is my mother." "How do you do?" I said formally with a polite nod of my head. "I'm Bella Swan." "Bella, you say?" "Mrs. Masson said. Is that your full name?" No," I replied. "It's short for Isabella." "Well, it's a very pretty name indeed. Would you like to accompany us home for tea? Perhaps we can be of some assistance to you." "Thank you," I sighed, a little overwhelmed with relief. "You're very kind." "Well, we all need a bit of kindness now and then, do we not?" she said with a gentle smile, taking Edward's arm. "It's simply the right thing to do." I tentatively took Edward's other arm, which he offered to me, and smiled back. "Still, you are a great deal more kind than most." I doubted many people would be willing to humor an oddly dressed, virtually homeless girl in the middle of Chicago, no matter what the decade. Edward and his mother led me down several city blocks and around a corner. Only to go 3 more blocks after that. The walk was very quiet, and I felt awkward, but I used the time to think about what I would say to them. I had already said I was from Washington. I needed to give them a reason why I was here now and why I didn't have a home to go to. Perhaps I could say I was an orphan, since it was true that I had no parents. They didn't yet exist in this time. The story fell easily into place from there. I had been orphaned 3 years ago. My parents came from small families and I had no living relatives that I knew of. Because of my age, I wasn't sent to the orphanage. I had found work with a widowed seamstress, who paid me with room and board, but she had passed away recently and I had come east, looking for new employment. By the time we turned onto a small path to their house, I was feeling quite pleased with the history I had concocted for myself. The Massons' home was beautiful, a construction of brick with white trim. Mrs. Masson went in ahead and Edward directed me to the parlor. I found myself sitting on a light green sofa while Edward took an armchair nearby. His eyes watched me carefully, curiously, and I had to look away from his gaze. It was disconcerting, to say the least, to see him this way, and incredibly awkward to know him and be equally aware that he knew nothing about me. Mrs. Masson returned a moment later with a tray loaded with all things necessary for tea. "Your home is beautiful," I said as she poured me a cup. "Thank you," she replied, filling the other 2 cups. "It was built just after the Great Fire." I swallowed back my surprise. "How fascinating." She asked me how I liked my tea, and after adding cream and sugar, she sat back to look at me, and her stare was as penetrating as her son's. "Why don't you tell us how you've come to be here, Miss Swan?" I took a fortifying gulp of my tea and launched into my story. It was hard to keep eye contact with them, hard to deceive them, but what other choice did I have? "I'm sorry to hear of your parents, Mrs. Masson said when I finished. Forgive me, but may I inquire as to the manner of your dress? I don't think I've ever seen a girl in denim trousers before." "Oh, well, it's easier to travel this way," I lied. "Fewer people bother you when you're dressed as a man. I tailored these to fit better. I knew neither my shirt nor my jeans looked like a man's clothing." Mrs. Masson nodded her understanding. "It must be difficult for a young lady to travel alone these days." "Sometimes," I said vaguely. "I've managed well enough." "Well," Mrs. Masson said, "we'll be happy to offer you a place to stay until you find new employment." "Thank you," I said, infusing my voice with as much gratitude as possible. "I can't begin to repay you for your kindness." "Nonsense," she replied with a wave of her hand. She looked at me contemplatively. "You have no belongings with you, so I suppose you have nothing suitable to wear during your stay." "No, I don't, I'm sorry." "No need to apologize. I think I have something suitable for you. Come upstairs with me. Edward, will you see to the spare bedroom?" "Of course," he answered. His voice shocked me once again. I followed her up the main staircase into a room that I assumed was her bedroom. She went to a wardrobe and pulled out a long blue frock, which she held up to me. That will do nicely, don't you think? The color suits your complexion. You can try it on later. I'll try to find a few more things for you to sleep in and such. Thank you, I said again, unable to find any other way to express myself. She merely smiled. Let's show you to your room, then. Come along. I found myself sitting alone in a spare bedroom in the Masson family's house. The bed was a lovely, luxurious thing. The tall wooden posts finely carved and stained, the comforter thick and warm. The wallpaper was elegant, the carpet a lovely sage. It was as nice as any place I had ever been. And in spite of the pleasant surroundings, in spite of the long-sleeved dress that seemed to cover every inch of me, I felt cold all the way through. How was this possible? How could I be making a wish on my birthday cake one moment, and the next be standing in the middle of Chicago, nearly a century in the past? Making a wish, it couldn't be, could it? I had wished I could give Edward human experiences, hadn't I? I didn't mean that quite so literally. I mumbled to myself, burying my face in my hands. This was impossible. Sure, I'd seen a lot of impossible things since I'd met Edward, but time travel. And from a wish on a birthday cake, no less. The weirdness I could deal with, though. It was even sort of cool, really. I had the chance to see Edward as a human, as the normal teenage boy he once was, but I had to wonder what the price was. Would I ever see my Edward again? What if there was no way back to my own time and place? I tried to imagine living out my life here, growing old, dying, losing any chance of forever with Edward. The pain that stabbed my chest was unendurable, and the tears that had been pricking at my eyes ever since Mrs. Masson had left me alone finally spilled forth. Was this even real? Could it be real? Surely I had just fallen down and was hallucinating all of this as a result of a concussion. Maybe I was completely schizophrenic and had been imagining everything all along. Ow, that thought was as bad as all this being real. If I was truly in the past, what would be the ramifications on the future? If I changed things somehow, if this Edward never fell ill and became a vampire, then I would never meet him in the future and then therefore never come back in time, but then I wouldn't be around to change anything. Trying to think about that made my head hurt, so I gave up. Clearly there was nothing in my power to do to change the situation, so I had no choice but to be pulled along with the current. If only my vampire were here to protect me. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts, and I instinctively knew it would be Edward. The hesitance and gentleness had not faded over the span of 80 years. I almost called for him to come in, but I wasn't sure how. Proper that was in this time, why had I never bothered to learn more about the world Edward grew up in? And so I went to open the door myself. He stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, flushed with life. His eyes were intent as they met mine. I came to check on you. Have you been crying? He asked as I hastily swiped the tears from my cheeks. Oh, yes, but it's nothing. I'm fine, I lied. He narrowed his eyes, and I knew he saw right through me. Can I do anything? He asked, and I held back a sigh of relief that he didn't ask for explanation. Thank you, but no, I said, caught in his eyes. They were the same eyes that had always seemed to pierce right through me, and yet, they were so different. There's nothing that can be done. I'm sorry to hear that. Edward saw Ed, standing awkwardly in the doorframe. Would it perhaps improve your mood to accompany me on an errand? My mother seems to have forgotten a crucial ingredient for tonight's meal. It was impossible to refuse. That sounds nice. Give me a moment. I'll wait downstairs, he said, leaving me to stare helplessly at my reflection in the mirror on the vanity. I had the right clothing on now, but none of the women here seemed to wear their hair down. And I had no way to put mine up. I sighed, frustrated, and reached up to fiddle with the loose strands, but a flash of light against my finger stopped me. My wedding band, paired with the engagement ring that I hadn't wanted to stop wearing, sparkled on my ring finger. A flutter of panic hit me. That ring had belonged to Edward's mother, the woman who had just taken me in. Had she seen the ring? Had Edward? Surely they would think me a thief if they saw me wearing it. I hastily jerked both rings off my hand, feeling a pang of sadness at the loss. Edward had placed those rings on my fingers and bound himself to me for eternity. I hated to break that bond, even figuratively. After that, the state of my hair didn't seem to matter so much. I left it down. As I went to meet Edward in the sitting room, he stood immediately and greeted me with a smile, a very familiar lopsided smile that made my heart flip. I forced my lips to smile back. "Where are we headed?" I asked. He offered his arm and I took it hesitantly. "The market, naturally," he said, leading me out the door and down the street in the direction we had come from this morning. "We're in need of celery, apparently." "Celery," I repeated, struck abruptly by the fact that this Edward ate. I mentally smacked myself. Of course he ate, he was human. "Do you like celery?" "Not particularly," he said, bemused. I could tell he was trying to figure out what I was thinking. Some things didn't change, evidently. "Do you?" "No," I said, blushing at the ridiculousness of the conversation. "Good one, Bella. Have you a stance on broccoli, then?" "I find it terribly offensive." His tone was serious, but his eyes were bright, teasing. "I'm indifferent," I said, trying to force down my blush, as if that had ever worked. "What do you like to eat, then?" Edward grinned. "Honestly, I'm a terrible sweet tooth. I like anything sugary." I laughed and wondered how that related to my Edward. He'd said I smelled floral sweet. I wondered what Mountain Lion tasted like to him, and if so much had really changed. So far, it seemed to me that this Edward was in many ways the same, aside from diet and bodily functions. That scared me, perhaps more than it should, probably because I was already falling for this Edward. It felt wrong somehow, like cheating on my Edward, and yet it was the same person. "And what about you?" he asked as we passed the spot where he'd found me earlier. I struggled to remember what we had been discussing. "Pasta," I said. "Any kind of pasta." One of his eyebrows shot up. "Interesting." "Why is that interesting?" We were reaching a more crowded area now, and people were staring openly at me. I knew my appearance must stand out. I wondered if any of them suspected. "Honestly, my mother insisted upon changing the dinner menu for tonight once you arrived. She swore you'd want pasta. Sometimes I wonder about her." I blinked. She sounded like Alice. "Your mother is very perceptive." Edward smiled. "Sometimes frighteningly so. She's always seemed to know exactly what's in my head, no matter how hard I try to hide it from her." "Like what?" I asked, eager to keep him talking. He turned to look at me, his skin shining in the sun but in the human way. His lips twisted up and I wondered how soft they would feel. "She knew as soon as I started thinking about it that I wanted to fight in the war. She's been doing everything she can to try to keep me here ever since. But as soon as I'm 18, I'll likely be drafted, and then she'll have no choice." I bit my lip, thinking about the irony that the war would be over before he turned 18, and then that, if things went the way they were supposed to, he would be a vampire before he turned 18. "Why do you want to fight?" I asked, choking back fear. Not fear for his safety, I knew he wouldn't go, but fear that I would lose him, without a way back to the future. "When this war is over," he said seriously, stopping and forcing me to turn. "The men who fought will be the most honored men in the country. I don't want to stay behind and be thought a coward, or have anyone say that I didn't have what it took." This wasn't the Edward the first knew. Or was it? Maybe this was just another aspect of what I had deemed to be his martyr complex. And I thought of what he had told me once, how he had filled his head with thoughts of soldiering. I was always that boy. I thought of nothing but the idealized glory of the war that they were selling prospective draftees then. But if I had found you, there isn't a doubt in my mind how I would have proceeded. I was that boy, who would have, as soon as I discovered that you were what I was looking for, gotten down on one knee and endeavored to secure your hand. I would have wanted you for eternity, even when the word didn't have quite the same connotations. But what if you don't come back? I found myself asking, missing my Edward more than ever. Millions of men are dying over there. You'd rather die than be thought weak. Isn't there anything you really want to do? He cocked his head curiously. Do you always ask so many questions? I remembered a night a long time ago. Driving through the darkness and asking questions just so the night wouldn't end. Yes, I said, for once without a blush. I'm curious. He shrugged. I've never really known what I want, he said. But I want to do something with my life. I think you will, I said, squeezing the arm that he offered to me once again. I hope you're right, he said with a smile. Well, here we are. I realized we were in a much more crowded area, and as I looked around, I saw what the market was. It was an enormous outdoor market with seemingly endless stalls selling vegetables, fruits, grain, and non-food products, as well as a carpenter's stall selling various furnishings, an old woman selling knit items. Are all these people here every day? I asked in awe, being pulled along by Edward as he wound through the stalls. Some of them, he said, pausing to inspect a stall which consisted of little more than several barrels of vegetables on a wagon. He shook his head to himself and continued on. Others only come here occasionally. To drum up business. Most of the artisans have shops of their own. Oh, it was all so old-fashioned. There's nothing like this in Washington. Edward laughed. I'm sure you've missed out on a lot up there in the middle of nowhere. Eventually we found the rather elusive celery and turned to browsing the less edible wares. I found myself drawn to a table covered in jewelry. Rows and rows of rings lay before me, but one caught my eye: topaz set unconventionally in silver. In my mind, that topaz became Edward's eyes the morning after our wedding, alight with happiness as he beamed down at me. The sun had come out that day, like an omen, and the light through the windows made his naked body shimmer as he held himself over me. My hands gripped the edge of the table before me and I closed my eyes, holding in my tears. More than anything, I wanted his strong, cool arms around me and his voice in my ear, saying it was all a dream. Instead, a warm hand gently squeezed my shoulder, and I had to open my eyes to reality again. Bella, what's the matter? He asked, glancing from my agonized expression to the table I still clutched for support. His eyes traveled over the rings and back to me. You left someone behind, didn't you? In Washington. I swallowed heavily. Sort of. It was out of my control. There's nothing I could do. You were in love? He asked softly, allowing me to look away. Yes, I sighed. He squeezed my shoulder. I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do. Thank you, I said, reaching up to place my hand over his. Let's go home, shall we? Of course, he agreed, taking my hand. The subject didn't come up again. The candles went out, and suddenly Bella was no longer in her chair. The panic came instantly. Was no way. I simply didn't see her. Darkness was no obstacle for my eyes. Only the ghost of her scent lingered in the air, and the silence pressed in abruptly without her heartbeat. What happened? I croaked, looking around at the faces of my bewildered family. Where is she? Alice shook her head. I can't see her. My eyes darted around the room as if I would find her in a corner. Bella, I cried out, as if it would make her return. Bella, how could this happen? Alice asked softly, turning to Carlyle. No one could have taken her. We would smell them. And Bella obviously couldn't sneak away. I looked dumbly to Carlyle as well, praying for answers. How could my wife just disappear? I don't know, he said helplessly. The Volturi, perhaps maybe they have a power we don't know of. I gaped. The power to make someone disappear into thin air. No, it can't be the Volturi. Then who else? Rosalie said, but I shook my head, clinging to denial. If the Volturi had her. I'll make some calls, Carlyle said, heading for his study. Don't panic. Don't panic, he says, I muttered to myself. My wife disappeared into thin air and I'm not supposed to panic. Jasper placed a hand on my shoulder, gripping hard enough that I couldn't shake him off, and he sent a wave of calm through me. You won't get her back in that state. You have to keep a clear head, he argued as I glared at him. I turned to Alice to ask if she could see anything yet, but I stopped abruptly as a vision flashed before my eyes. She was impossible to miss. Her bright blouse and strange trousers stood out amongst the drab, conventional dresses of the other women on the street. What caught my attention, however, was the look on her face. I had never seen anyone look so lost, or so alive. The contradiction piqued my curiosity. I wanted to know her. "Excuse me, miss," I found myself saying, approaching. She looked up, full of surprise. Frozen with surprise, actually. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "Miss, are you all right?" She blinked as if coming out of a daze. "Actually, I'm a bit lost." Edward, what's wrong?" Alice asked, waving her hand in front of my face to get my attention. I blinked. "I think I just had a vision," I said, wondering why the hell I would see that in my mind. "Of the future?" Alice asked, full of skepticism. "No," I shook my head. "Of the past. I saw it was like a memory. Meeting Bella in 1918. But she was wearing the same clothes she wore tonight." "Well, maybe that's where she is," Alice shrugged, suddenly calm. "No," I said immediately, intrigued to get my mind around the idea. "She can't be in 1918. How could she even get there?" Alice shrugged again. "Beats me. But it would explain why I can't see her. Her entire future is in the past right now." "It can't be," I said again, less forcefully. "She can't be in the past. Where else could she be, then?" Given the circumstances, I think it's the only logical answer, even if it defies the laws of physics. Okay, I could handle this. Maybe it wasn't even remotely within the realm of reality, but I ought to be used to defying the laws of nature. I did it every day. But ever since Bella had come into my life, I'd felt more and more human, and now I wasn't equipped to deal with anything like this. Much as I tried to compose myself, the panic kept creeping back in. "All right, so she's in the past. How do I get her back?" I asked, bordering on desperation, but the rest of the family looked back at me with pity, offering no answers. The panic flared. I headed for the door. "I need to get some air," I muttered before walking out. We didn't really have a backyard. The trees encroached almost all the way to the house, and I walked among them without thought, hoping that when I left them again, I would find it had all been an illusion. Why was this happening? What force could have sent Bella back in time, and for what purpose, and most of all, why now? It made no sense, and there were no answers to be had. My feeling of helplessness turned into frustration, and I slammed my fist into the nearest tree. It made a neat hole through the center, but releasing my anger only left me feeling empty. I fell back against the trunk I'd just smashed, closing my eyes. "Why did you invite her to stay with us?" I asked my mother. I wasn't upset. I was glad, and I knew my mother could see that, though I tried to hide it. But I didn't understand. "She's a complete stranger. She's perfectly trustworthy. I think she can take good care of herself, actually, but there was something about her. Something that makes her unique, though I can't place my finger on it. And I saw the way you looked at her," she added smugly. "You've never paid as much attention to any young lady as you did today." "That's ludicrous," I said, though my face burned. "Seems like quite a leap of faith to take in a stranger because you think your son has taken a fancy to her." "Maybe," she said with an enigmatic smile. "But my instincts are never wrong." "Never say never," I muttered, though I couldn't argue. Her instincts were more precise than any scientific instrument, and it looked like they had something in store for me. I opened my eyes, disoriented. That was the clearest memory I'd ever had of my mother, but somehow, it felt as though I'd always had that memory even though I knew it was new to me. Carlyle's mental voice called out to me from the house, forcing me back into the present. "Edward, it doesn't look like the Volturi had anything to do with this. I'm sorry, I don't have any answers for you. I've never heard of anything like this happening before. I keep seeing things, Carlyle," I replied, just loud enough for him to hear me in the house. "Like memories, except they're memories I've never had before. They're from my human life, and Bella is in them. Alice thinks Bella has somehow gone back in time." Carlyle's mind was completely silent for a long moment. It makes as much sense as anything else, he replied. I don't know what we can do, but I'll keep contacting old friends. Perhaps someone else will know more. What if I never get her back? I asked, choking on my fear. What if? Thoughts like that won't help. Have faith, Edward, and keep focused on your memories. If she truly is in the past, you'll be able to keep track of her. He was right, I knew. I could only wait for her to return, if she could return at all, and watch her. I would watch her faithfully, then, until she came back to me because she would. She had to. We'd been rough too many trials to be separated now. I sat at the base of the tree I'd been leaning on and closed my eyes again, tracing through the memories. Meeting Bella, taking her home, talking to my mother, and then there were new memories. I took her to the market, and she seemed happy, but then she stopped in front of the rings and a look of agony crossed her face. You left someone behind, didn't you? In Washington. Her throat flexed as she swallowed. I wanted to reach out and touch her pale neck, but I forced my hand to remain still. Sort of. It was out of my control. There's nothing I could do. You were in love, I asked her, knowing the answer before she spoke. It was written all over her face. A strange feeling of despair swept through me. If her heart was taken. Yes, she sighed, looking up at me with her sad eyes. I wished I could comfort her. I thought about the look on her face. Knowing she'd been speaking of me as the one she left behind, I saw all of her fear and sadness. And I felt two sets of emotions: the memory of my past self longing to comfort her, and my present self wishing I could reach her. And then there was the anxiety I couldn't straighten out. My human self was already in love with her. I knew that I would love her in any time and under any circumstances, and my human self longed to be loved in return. And yet, I felt a strange dread that would occur. Perhaps she wouldn't want to come back to me. Perhaps after being with me as a human, she would no longer want what I now had to offer her. No, I told myself. Bella feels the same way. It won't matter to her what I am. But I couldn't erase the doubt. I felt a hand on my shoulder and opened my eyes. I saw Alice and gave her a hopeful, questioning glance. She shook her head. No, I still haven't seen anything. But I do have a theory. I'm listening, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Bella disappeared the moment she blew out her birthday candles. Yes, I know, I was there, I said, puzzled. Yes, but I kept wondering why it would be that moment. And then it occurred to me that I told her to make a wish just before. A wish, I said skeptically. You think she wished her way to 1918? Alice rolled her eyes at me. I doubt it was that specific, but there's a reason you're supposed to be careful what you wish for. Whatever she wished for must have taken her there. It's the only answer I can think of. Quote, it's crazy, I said. But so is everything else that's happened today. Even these new memories, they're coming faster than they could possibly be happening. Alice shrugged. Nothing else about this makes sense, Edward. Why should that be any different? I nodded, but sighed, and Alice sat down beside me, perhaps sensing my mood. I'm scared, Alice, I admitted. This has the potential to end in disaster in so many ways, and I can't do a single thing. Alice put her arm around me in a half hug. You just have to trust that your past self will take good care of her. I do, I said with a short laugh. That's what scares me the most. After we returned from the market, I found myself sitting in the parlor with Edward and his mother, waiting for his father to arrive home from work. His mother was knitting what appeared to be a sock. I couldn't follow what she was doing. Things that required hand-eye coordination weren't usually my forte. I tried to read a book I'd retrieved from the small library, but I couldn't concentrate on the text. My eyes and thoughts continually turned to Edward, who sat across from me, also reading. He seemed to have no trouble focusing. I heard a rumble outside and looked up as the other two did. That will be your father, Mrs. Masson murmured, and I realized the sound was an engine. A very old-fashioned engine. Why Edward would be horrified at the ruckus it made. Elizabeth's eyes darted to me, and she offered a warm smile before turning her eyes back to the front entryway. Neither would say a word, but I knew. Edward and his mother were nervous to introduce me to him. I wondered how he would take the appearance of a random stranger in his home. Edward had never told me much about him, other than that he was a lawyer. I don't think he remembered much. The front door opened, and Edward and his mother both stood. I followed suit, unsure of myself. What was the proper etiquette for introductions in this decade? Why had I spent so much time reading about the Regency era and passed over this crucial time period? I wanted to kick myself, but I would probably end up doing damage to the parlor furniture. Footsteps reached the doorway, and I had my first glimpse of Edward's father. He had light brown hair and brown eyes, rather plain, actually, but his face was pleasant and gentle. He was young still, but wrinkles had started to form on his brow and around his mouth, and his hair grayed at the temples. A high widow's peak suggested he was balding as well. I could see that he would have been very handsome in his 20s. And I hoped his kind appearance matched his personality. "Edward, darling," Elizabeth said, stepping forward to place a hand on my shoulder. "This is Bella Swan. She'll be staying with us for a while." "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said conventionally, doing an awkward move between a nod and a curtsy. He nodded back politely and I watched his eyes flash to Edward, then back to me, and finally to his wife. "Would you accompany me to the kitchen, darling?" Elizabeth said quickly, reaching for her husband's arm. "I want you to try the sauce."